This is the DC Collectibles DC Films Batman v Superman figure number 1, Armored Batman. A figure that can go toe-to-toe with the Man of Steel. This is the first figure of only a two-figure release from the folks over at DC Collectibles. This is Batman in his armored outfit from the film Batman v Superman. Let's go ahead and get some measurements for Armored Batman. Putting the tape measure next to him, he is a little bit taller than Superman, standing at 7 1/4 inches in height. In fact, to show you the differences in their sizes, let's bring over the Superman figure that we've already had a look at. I do like this figure quite a bit, but he is smaller. To no fault of him, but he is smaller though than Armored Batman. A lot of that can be credited to the fact that Batman is, of course, wearing his helmet, which does give him some extra height over the Man of Steel to the left. And with a split-second cut and some fast-paced editing, we're now having a look at the display base that comes included with the Armored Batman, which, yes, in fact, if you are experiencing a sense of deja vu, this is, in fact, the exact same stand as what we got with Superman. The same base consisting of several different peg points, a total of 8, 4 at the bottom, 4 at the top, and it does also have the adjustable neck in the exact same fashion as Superman's, right down to the fact that there is the waist clip. Now the waist clip does fit around Batman's waist, of course, but it doesn't fit as well. It seems like it's a little on the smaller side. You can still get it to the point where it is latching its way around Batman's torso, but yes, it does make for a bit of a cumbersome experience trying to get it to fit around Batman's waist here. The figure comes included with 5 accessories, a smaller quantity than Superman's release with 7, but those accessories still pretty cool nonetheless. For starters, he gets himself the Kryptonite grenade gun. It is pretty nice, although I will say it does come across, it reads to me a little smaller than what it should. Doesn't really have a whole lot of paint to it, relying solely on the use of the gunmetal plastic that they did for the mold itself. I will say this, though, stressing this, and stressing being the operative word, that the back section, the extension part that sits to the shoulder, does seem to have a thinner plastic. Now, I worry about this if you have accidentally put this against the figure and you're pushing down. You don't want to definitely add any stress marks to that. Grenade launching gun seems small, and he doesn't come with any sort of grenades that can go inside the canister here, the launcher itself. I will say, though, as well, it doesn't fit well into Batman's hands. Now, defaulted out of packaging, I'm just going to show you here for a second, he does come with closed fists. I currently don't have him holding the closed fist because I always find closed fists to be boring, but he does get 2 of those, or rather a pair of those. What I instead swapped them out for, which was I believing at the time to be gripping hands. They grip, but they don't grip well. The handle, I think, is way too small to fit Batman's hands, and nor is really the trigger on the finger extended long enough. The trigger pointing finger is long enough to really catch, actually should be like right up here to be more accurate. There we go. It doesn't quite fit everything correctly, being the trigger here. It doesn't fit things correctly, and I feel at times like the hand just doesn't hold it, or it doesn't hold it in the correct fashion. If you were to tell me that this came from a different Batman figure and was included and somebody just simply swapped it, I would have actually believed you. I do feel like this is the wrong size for holding in Batman's hands. Now, if you think to yourself, well, you could also put it in his other hand. True, fair. I'll give you that. It does fit a little bit better. In fact, it does fit a lot better than this hand here, but it still does fit a little on the loose side. And through the process of doing that, I find like the fists pop out way too frequently. Do bear with me 1 second. You know, I simply could just not include that part in the review, but I always get a chuckle when I drop stuff on the floor. Hopefully you guys get a chuckle out of that too. But the hands use a rather large ball joint, and the socket itself, I always feel like I'm not quite getting the hand properly fitted on the joint. As quickly as I think I get it, it wants to pop itself off again. But going back to the grenade gun here, to its credit, I guess if you did want a more secure fit, this hand is the better of the two hands. This hand really isn't the greatest for holding it. Still feels like it's a little on the smaller side. Certainly still feels like it doesn't fit properly in his hands, but this hand a little bit better than that hand. The other accessories are really just hands. Ironically enough, we just finished talking about hands. The other hands that he comes included with are gripping, man-handling hands for the Man of Steel. This would pair perfectly then if you have Superman with his Batman manhandling hands. Man-handling hands. They are slightly a little bit more open, as you can see here, to the trigger-firing hands. Not so much on this side, but you can see that they are a little bit on a broader stretch, that they are extended a little bit further out. If you're that kind of guy as well that loves just their figures with their hands kind of extending outward, this would be that type of hand as well. I'm guilty of that, doing that in thumbnails. That's basically it, in a nutshell, for Batman. Thanks for watching, guys. No, there's more. Come on, there's more. Okay, so let's have a look at Armored Batman. Collectively, he works well. There's a few little that I'm questioning here on the figure itself, but overall I am pretty happy with the figure. Now, if you think the lights are on and nobody's home upstairs, you're pretty much correct by that assumption. His eyes defaulted are pitch black. Before the villagers get together with their torches, let me just also say that there is, which I did have it in the figure at the beginning here, a little stopper point here, a little plastic piece that you have to pull out, and then there's a battery compartment located on the back. This does activate, let me just press the button right here, a light up option in the eyes. Nicely done. I also like the fact that it's not white eyes, rather instead it's almost got a bluish tint to it, which is accurate to the way it looks in the movie. Defaulted though, by just only the way that it was constructed, it does also somewhat mimic the white outlining around its eyes that it does have in the movie. Now we're going to just sit and look at this for a second. Don't worry, this isn't going to take several minutes. There you go. You can see that the light defaults and turns off on its own. This works good in the sense that you're not draining batteries. This does not, however, work well, and by the way, the activation point is the bottom of the ab muscle armor plates. It's this bottom button here. This also turns on and off the eyes. So if somehow you don't want to wait the minute or so before it shuts off, you simply can just press the button again. I like the fact that it doesn't waste batteries. If your little brother or a friend of yours is playing with this figure and simply has just left the light on and thrown the figure onto the floor, you should never do that with a figure this good. You definitely would not run the risk that the batteries are going to drain on you. The downside, though, is the figure's head looks only good, and that's not being 100% fair, but the head sculpt looks good when the eyes are on. When the eyes are off, you feel as if something is definitely missing from the figure. I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, what happened to Batman's eyes? This is a similar problem that I've experienced when it came to the Sideshow Collectibles. We're mixing mediums here. The Sideshow Collectibles 6-scale Star Wars release of C-3PO. It had light-up options, but it only looked good when you had the lights on. When the lights are on in somebody's home, the figure looks good. When the lights are off, it definitely feels like it's missing something. And ideally, I would have almost, if I'd gone this route, forfeited the light-up options altogether and instead painted the eyes. At the very least, that would mean anytime you walked into your room, admired your vast collection on the shelves, you could at least appreciate that every single time and know for the fact that every single time that you came into the room, the figure's eyes would always be on. And instead, what you'd be looking at is this. Again, I'm of mixed opinions of this. You guys can let me know down below. But I really do think when a figure has light-up eyes, in which the light-up eyes play such a pivotal role in which the figure looks either good or missing something, I would almost instead favor having the eyes painted rather than having the light-up option. But the light-up option is so there if you do want that. It's that little button right there. By the way, flipping the figure around, I'm probably going to have to take a screwdriver and take the battery plate off. Why I say that is the little cord, if it is intended, if you can actually get it inside the battery plate, ultimately sticks out. It's this extra piece of fabric just sticking its way out of Batman's torso. The cape really will hide it, but it just bothers me that it's there. It's just the sense that knowing it's there is driving me bananas. As bananas as I could get looking at a 7-inch plastic figure. Okay. So batteries aside, little tags aside, I do quite like this figure. I still feel as if, and far be it from me to sound like I'm getting on that Beast Kingdom bandwagon, but I did mention though when I had a look at the Superman, I still think I like the Beast Kingdom one just a little bit better. I may also feel the same way when I'm looking at this figure here. Now before you get all over me, nasty comments down below, let me just say though that this figure does do things well. It's highly posable, exactly what you would want for an armored Batman to be. It's very well painted, and I think the sculpt otherwise is pretty good too. As for his head, keeping in mind, of course, the helmet is over top of Bruce Wayne's face, so you're really not going to see anything of a Ben Affleck impression other than just the lower mouth. The lower mouth uses that same sort of pastel sort of plastic, or at the very least, the way they painted it gives it that sense it's more pastel than anything else. I just want to bring your attention then to Superman, which we've, again, already had a look at, has that same sort of problem. I find with Batman it looks a little bit more obvious that the colorings seem off on his lower face. Just a little bit of paint on flesh was only this much on Batman. Everything else is really covered. I think the paint could have been a little bit better here. In fact, looking at it, it almost reminds me of going into those stores and you see those, those 3D print, we make your faces, but they never quite look like your faces. They look like your face is made out of a sponge. It kind of has that same vibe happening here. The rest of the face, though, is fantastic. I love the head sculpt. Again, you've got the darker gray with a little bit of dry brushing of silver added over top of it. A few little scratches, rips, dents, and everything else that Superman would have dispensed on this poor head of Bruce Wayne, not to really mention the rest of his body. Now, this is sort of the let's get down to rumbling with the Man of Steel. So, of course, the armoring here is still pretty intact. You don't have these squashed in shoulders. You don't have the ruptured and damaged front plate that the damaged Batman would have. This is pretty much Batman trying to get Superman's attention, trying to get him down to, again, discuss. As I'm sure it was a little bit more than just discussion. Again, like all this plastic is exquisitely painted with the dry brushing of silver over top of the gray. I know what you're thinking. How could something be so exquisitely painted? It's only got really like 3 colors to it. Valid point. But I do like that dry brushing gives a certain sense of extra depth to the armor. It gives it a little bit extra shine as well, which I think a lot of it is really thankful to the silver plastic or the silver paint rather than the gray plastic itself. It gives you that little extra sheen happening here. Of course, he's got his little strap and he's got his utility belt, about the only other place where he's got some extra additional coloring. Not to mention as well, he's got that also on the side fins or spikes on the sides of his gloves here. Also carries its way down to his boots. His boots very big, very clunky, sort of like the Mark I Iron Man suit. Very similar in design. And then in between the armor plates, the sensitive areas of Batman, sensitive areas, all the areas in which he doesn't want Superman pummeling him, those are all like a lighter gray plastic, and they've textured that in as well, so there's a little bit, it's not just simply smooth plastic. Digging that. Spikes on the undersoles of his shoes, there's boots, so he's allowed to get some traction when, of course, he's fighting Superman. And then let's have a look at the cape. The cape, still not too damaged. No dirt, no fraying on the bottom of the cape. I do like how it's got individual little seam lines to it. It gives it that sense that it looks like a bat wing. Very nicely done. And while it does not have what I can seem to find any wireframes on the interior of the cape, much like Superman's, he does have the wireframe on the outer areas. On here, here, and on, hold on, right here, right on this edge here. And that little bit of bend, again, you can manipulate that and really do as much as the cape will allow you to do that. These wireframe capes work well really from like the bottom area because that's the part that's draping. The top area really doesn't retain too much of that. However, you can still bend the frame. And the wiring starts at around there. This part here is just really just padded seaming. Here is actually where the wireframe starts. So even though you can bend it here, this part here will kind of sit a little on just, it will just sort of flop against Batman's torso. Running through this guy's posability, his head rotates back and forth. Ideally, it would rotate all the way around. Two things are sort of preventing that, one of which it would obviously kill Batman if he were to rotate his head all the way around. And it also seems that because of the nature of how big his helmet is, and for the fact that this part of his armor gets in the way of things, you can't really rotate his head past that point. Forcing it, sure, that will work. That sounds good on paper, but you really don't want to accidentally break anything as a result of it. It does seem like he does have a secondary ball joint. I'm going out on a limb and assuming that he does have a secondary ball joint. Yes, that is the fact. That is truth right there. Ball joint, secondary ball joint happening right there. Upper torso does have its own independent ball joint, and much like Superman, although it's a little harder to see here on Batman, he does seem to have, or maybe he doesn't actually, I thought he may have had a bit of a shoulder crunch. Ultimately, he just has the ball joint attaching the shoulder to the interior socket of the torso. While you are moving his arms, probably one of the obvious things you're seeing is that the shoulder pads here are attached. Let me just show you where. They're attached right to the top of the shoulders. It's a rather interesting place. Normally for Iron Man suits, they attach it to the torso. Here instead, what they've done is attach it to the shoulder, which I guess makes more sense because it does allow a more freer movement, and it does still look like it's part of his arm, which really it should have been anyways. Swiveling on the bicep, double hinge happening on the elbow, and Batman also has a rotation happening in his hand, back and forth. Does not have, let me just make sure I'm far enough back so you guys can see it. While he does have the upper torso ball joint, doesn't have anything happening here. As you could probably guess it, in order for this to happen, you can't have something that's going to start ruining and damaging the wires on the interior. So for that reason, they kept the ball joint here. They 86'd it. 86'd it. Legs hinge outward. You can drop the legs as well, similar to Superman. It ultimately just kind of makes it look like he's got a big glaring gap happening there. Does have the forward and back on the outs as well on the legs. He has a swiveling, and essentially it's just really swiveling along that ball joint. It's not really doing anything else. It doesn't have its own hinge, so to speak. Double hinge happening on the knee. Nothing in the lower leg. And unlike Superman, I must say he does have an ankle pivot, an ankle rock, and as well as a forward and back motion on the legs, on the feet. It does not have any toe articulation, so sadly, if that is, toe articulation is a deal breaker for you, this figure may be a pass. Don't pass, don't jump on passing on this figure just yet, Bunko. I gotta admit that this figure I do quite like. It pairs exceptionally well with the aforementioned Superman, which we've already had a look at on this channel. I think both figures work extremely well. I do think, though, that Beast Kingdom might have done a better service to the releases of these figures when they covered their versions of them in their own lines. To the credit, though, of DC Collectibles, though, I think there's a lot of merits in these particular figures that, even for the fact that they are slightly older figures and a little bit more expensive to pick up, I definitely would recommend still getting either one of these. However, I do think that they really should have released a Wonder Woman. If you're really going to give us a Superman, and you're going to give us a Batman, I don't see why they couldn't have released also a Gal Gadot Wonder Woman, but that's just me. When we had a look at these Supermen, I had mentioned that both of these figures were on my radar, and very much they were. Circumstances out of my control, though, arose, and I just wasn't able to find them at my local comic book store. I've mentioned in countless reviews, if you can't find something at a local comic book store, check with the person that's running the store and see if they can order them in. Well, this is an example of where that didn't work. I contacted several different stores, seeing if first that they had them, and none of them had them. So I asked a couple of stores if they could order them in, and it was simply not something that they could do. I don't know whether it was to their distributors' reasonings, but they just couldn't get the stock available to get these two figures, so I passed. I passed on the opportunity, thinking one day I would find them on online stores or online markets like eBay, and I did, but the prices were always really high on them. As luck would have it, Lady Luck would smile down on me, and I found a seller that was selling not just the Superman, but also the Armored Batman, and I quickly picked them up. And I'm very much glad that I did. Both figures are exceptionally good. Exceptionally good. I would say, if not having a look at the Beast Kingdom releases, which I know it sounds like I'm a big fan of the Beast Kingdom, I really am. If it wasn't for those, I would say that these are the best releases that we've seen for both Superman and Batman from the respected DC Universe movie franchise. I do like the paint that they've added to them. I do think I like the Superman a little bit more just because the coloring pops on him, and I love the cape that they gave him. Batman's no slouch, however. I like the light-up options, but I think the light-up option is also a bit of a detriment to the figure as well. Sure, it looks good when you press the button and turn it on, but it doesn't stay on. And for the amount of times that his eyes remain in darkness, I think it detracts a little bit from the figure itself. I almost would have even said, if they had given us the option somehow, I don't know how they could have done it, but given us two different head sculpts. One head sculpt allowed for the light-up options through the light piping in the eyes, the open visible eyes in which those could light up, and maybe a secondary head. A head that would have had fully painted eyes. So if you wanted to display this guy on a regular basis, shy of always going over and pressing a button to turn on his eyes for a few seconds, the interchangeable head could have been a solution to that problem. I really do like the Armored Batman, but he does look like he sits with his lights on, and, well, there's no lights on and there's nobody home, it just seems, when looking at his head here. I like the head sculpt, and I really can't help but think, once again, if we got ourselves a Superman and a Batman, it's really a shame that we never got ourselves a Wonder Woman. I don't know if maybe the way that licensing was at the time, they just couldn't get the likeness of Gal Gadot. I'm not really sure the reasoning for it, but you would think, though, that for the two heroes that appeared in the movie, Wonder Woman also appeared in the movie. I'm surprised they never gave us a release of her. Nonetheless, though, if you guys are looking to get some really outstanding releases of both Man of Steel Superman, or the Batman v Superman Superman, and the Armored Batman from Batman v Superman, these ones are really good to consider if you can find them at an affordable price. The price point on these may jump, may fluctuate. I've seen them at lowest points around $25 to $30, and at highest points, if you could actually believe that, around $70. Keeping in mind as well, $30 doesn't seem all that much, but when they're from US sellers, as a Canadian collector myself, I have to factor in the conversion of US dollars to Canadian dollars, the shipping costs, the sometimes import fees. A $35 figure, case in point, the Pennywise clown that I had to look at, when it was all said and done, I picked up that figure for $35, and I ultimately paid around, I think it was around $85 for that figure after the conversion, after the shipping, after the import charges. So even though it may seem good on paper, and it may be too good to be true to find a figure for cheap on eBay, you really do have to factor in the prices of conversion and shipping when you are buying a figure. So I think if you guys can find this at a good, affordable price, I definitely would recommend picking up both the Superman and the Batman. But if you can only find the Beast Kingdom in local comic book stores, I would really highly recommend going that route instead. I think you're getting just as good of figures, if not a little bit better, and at the price point is probably a little bit more reachable because you're buying it from local stores. Either way, though, today we were having a look at the DC films. This was the figure number 1 Armored Batman, with a very long-winded closing end of this review, so I do apologize for that. Certainly more videos, guys, will be coming your way, so make sure you hit that little subscribe button down below. More videos will be coming your way, and as well, like I said, if you want to see what I've done up to this point, or any future videos, you can also head over to the main page, and you'll see everything I posted up to this point, including these two figures here. More, guys, will be coming your way, so thanks for watching as you always do. I'll see you next time.